All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Veterans Day. I want to say thank you to all of the armed forces and all the retired and active military members. Thank you for your service. And again, thank you for being everything that you have been to our country on this Veterans Day. So today we have kind of a special edition. I have a gentleman in who is a longtime personal friend, and I want to say legend in the coaching industry. He's working on 20 years. Hopefully we'll get through the time that we have right now. We'll get back on field and he can get back on track. But I'm lucky to have Mr. Paul Svagdis, the head man from Azusa Pacific University. So Paul, thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ernie. It's certainly an honor to be here. We've known each other over 20 years now. Yeah. So when you shot me a text and said, hey, you want to come out, I was more than happy to be out here, so I'm pumped for it.
And I think that's probably it's probably an old guy thing. I'm a little older than you. Yeah. We were matching stories, but you get to that point where you're just grateful to have that sit down time. And I know I am. Maybe you don't feel that way yet, but I'm at that age where I do a lot of texting, but I still appreciate being able to sit down and just chat.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like everything right now, especially, is just so fast paced that being able to just sit down with a buddy or sit down with someone that you enjoy talking to is almost something you can't do anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, we certainly don't want to be in the middle of a pandemic, and it's been super hard for everybody. But there are some things like that where priorities come back into alignment a little bit when you realize you're missing out on a lot.
Yeah, and I know from the time that we've spent together, I know how strong your family is, and I see the pictures, you guys traveling and things like that. So I think for someone like you that's always prioritized family, I think it's just something that you've had more time that you've ever done before, to where, as the coaching grind and talking to some of the other coaches, it's almost something that they get a chance to reappreciate because their normal schedule doesn't allow it. But as long as I've known you, you've done a really good job of keeping that separation and I think keeping that priority in line for you. So I think this has kind of been probably more of a blessing in some ways for you with your family.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think my wife and I, that going into coaching, coaching is it's 24/7. You psychologically wrap yourself up into the process. So it's certainly a challenge to do family well when you're in the coaching world. But I think when we got into it and our kids were just munchkins. Right. Now my daughter's a senior in college and my son's a junior in high school. So we've come through all of those younger years. Yeah. We really tried to take that time to involve them in the process. And being at a Division II or an NAI school where I was at where I've been at for the last 20 years really afforded me the opportunity to do that and still compete well. Yeah. So yeah, for sure. And now, I've been my arm's in great shape. My 17-year-old son, we've been long tossing for 120 days during the pandemic. Every day we go out, and he needed someone to throw with, and I'm like, all right, let's go down the park. So I've been enjoying that time just playing catch with my son.
Yeah, and you look at that, and you think, how often would that have happened if things were back the way they were, so to speak? I mean, and those are things that you can. When I talk to different people now, because I work for the school district in the mornings, and then with the students that I have, there's just so many different points of view, and when you're dealing with people of different ages, it's interesting the way that they all view it. And so I've always tried as much as I can to put a positive spin on things, and trying to find the light in this sometimes is difficult. But, when you sit back, and if you're fortunate enough to have family around, it's one of those times that you'll look back on maybe in 5 years and we'll go, you know what, I was able to spend more time with this person or that person.
Absolutely.
I'll be grateful.
Yeah, and surprisingly, usually this could be a tough time on the mom and dad, the husband and wife, right? Because you're so used to being busy, and now we're home every single day.
Yeah.
I think my wife and I, Catherine, looked at each other and we're like, oh yeah, we really do enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
So that was a cool blessing as well. I was spending a lot of mornings, a lot of afternoons, even though we were working from Zoom and doing those sort of things. You had that opportunity to have that minute by minute, hour by hour interaction, and so I wouldn't pass that up for much.
Because you try to play that out in your mind. If this were a normal season, how much time away would you have now?
Right.
You'd still be at the field, you'd still be at the school, you'd still be doing administrative things with baseball. And like you said, it's something that you have to wrap your head around, because even when you're at home, it's hard as a coach to not let your mind spin on what's tomorrow's practice, or, oh, I've got to take care of this, I've got to take care of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. My wife makes fun of me. Probably shouldn't say this. We'll go to church on Sundays. We haven't been because of COVID, so we watch it on TV. But there's a lot of Sundays where I was doing my lineups for that week in church on the back of the bulletin, and she'd look at me and hit me, So you're right. It's hard to turn your mind off because the team's your family, just like your kids are your kids. And I have so much respect for what you do with your athletes. We were just talking about that before we went on air. The care and the relationships that you develop with your athletes that extend beyond your experience with them.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I've admired most about what you've done. And, we've had a number of guys that you've sent us, and the kids have been first class in every way. So, but you're right, it's hard to turn it off because they become your family, and you never turn family off, right?
Yeah. So. And if you're doing it in church, you got to figure there's got to be some kind of divine intervention. At
least I hope so.
If you're getting the push from there, but you're absolutely right. And we've talked about this in past episodes with other coaches. We don't get in it for the baseball. The baseball is a part we love, but there's always that big piece of a coach that enjoys giving, and at some point now, maybe not so much in your level because you're with guys constantly. We talk about the kids that we train. The hardest thing to do is swallow your own pride, because anymore, pretty much every player that comes in has more knowledge than you ever did at that age.
Yeah.
And probably more athletic ability now than you did because of all of the things that they have at their fingertips.
Right.
You can learn how to do just about anything on your phone. Yeah. And there's information out there, and there's just so much that it's really hard to not take advantage of that. You get a lot of players now that they're just so motivated because they can find things on their own. And it's kind of humbling when you get all these players now, and it probably makes the choices tougher for you as a coach because now there's just so many players that have elevated. So when you go out and scout, there's not that separation before like there used to be.
Yeah, for sure. And technology plays a huge role in that with Twitter and the coaches that are getting on Twitter and Instagram. And shoot, I'm scrolling through that in the morning before I go to work, and I'm like, oh, that's a nice drill right there. That's a coach is throwing up. So yeah, I think the kids are definitely more advanced than they were 20 years ago. I think they're definitely more prepared. But being a college coach, and I'm sure some of my friends that are coaching college would probably agree with this, sometimes you actually have to deprogram the kids now because they're so programmed with their access to information. They have to. There's a line in Star Wars. I'm not a big Star Wars fan, but Yoda was working with Luke Skywalker. He was trying to raise the Millennium Falcon out of the mud, right, with his Jedi mind.
Yeah.
And Luke was frustrated sitting on a rock, and he said, "I can't do it." And one of the lines from Yoda was that you have to unlearn what you've learned. So in your mind, you've learned you can't do it.
Right.
We have to unlearn that. And I think sometimes even at the college level now, the kids have so much access to information that starts to bog them down a little bit as well. So I always kid around with them. I'm like, hey, you're going to have to unlearn some things, especially when they come in as young guys, to even take two more steps forward. Yeah. So yeah, it's been great in one hand, but also it's just been from a coaching standpoint, you have to shift your focus now to getting them back to some basic ideas and fundamentals.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a cool thing in general, because that was one of the next things I was going to ask you. As a coach, when you have going at it for 20 plus years now from where you started, and we'll get to that in a second, but looking at the way you approach your program and how you're setting things up, how much of that has changed, or have you noticed it's evolved because of the type of player you're getting now? More information, more tech savvy, maybe looking for more feedback on the tech level rather than kind of the old school, this is what I see.
Yeah, and my guys at APU are used to a little more of an old school guy with a higher level of intensity. Yeah. It's probably my football background and my East Coast background being from Boston. But like literally this year, I just bought the Rhapsody pitching and hitting because the kids not necessarily have an expectation for it, but it's another tool for them to learn. Yeah. And so I'm laughing because half the time I can't even understand the data. I'm on YouTube myself trying to figure out what a gyro spin is for my pitchers. But at the end of the day, that's where baseball's going. You know, and if as a coach, you're not trying to evolve with that a little bit, you might get left behind. So I probably push back on it a little bit as an older generational coach, but at the end of the day, I think there's value in it. It's how you use it that's important. So I also think you probably have to we hear this about NFL guys, MLB guys. I've always felt like I was a relational coach, but I think you even have to be more relational now. The kids have to be able to identify with the coaching staff. They have to, it's not as old school where you don't talk to the coach as much as, back in the 80s and 90s, you really didn't talk to your head coach. Right. You just went out and played and just hope he wasn't talking to you.
Yeah.
Right. If he wasn't talking to you, you were doing all right, you know. Nowadays, I think they need more affirmation. They need more encouragement. I think they're willing to take kind of a foot in the backside. I think they're tougher than sometimes we give this generation credit for. But I think you have to earn the right to be able to do that. And that takes putting in that relational time and that trying to identify with what they're dealing with in their life now.
Yeah. That's a great perspective, because a lot of times and I remember those that you're talking about with the coaching, where it's almost the same as a principal or a vice principal. You don't want to be in that office. And I had a player the other day we were working with, and he said that I always joke with him. I said, "Hey, you're still the coolest guy in class." He's the only one in his class right now. But I said, "How's your brother doing?" And he says, "Oh yeah, he was pretty pumped, or he was upset because he got the lunch with the principal and he can't do it until we go back." And I said, "Yeah, man, I don't know if I could ever do that, because when I was young, you didn't want to go anywhere with the principal because it was usually going to be a bad trip." And he says, "No, he was pretty excited. He wanted to do that." And I'm like, I kind of wonder, what would you talk about, as a high school kid with your principal? And not discrediting any of the principals out there, but it's kind of an awkward conversation sometimes, because you don't want to say the wrong thing. It's like going to a job interview.
Sure.
But I think that relationship is key in anything, and that's one of the things that I was telling you we started this show for, because I think when players are looking for their next level, sometimes they can get focused too much on the baseball part of it. And what I'd mentioned before was that coaches don't always get in for the baseball, because you have that influence on so many of your guys after baseball. You probably have more, I think, that you have relationships with that didn't transition any further than your school baseball-wise. Yeah. But on a personal level, on a mentorship level, on maybe, even more of a father and uncle type of relationship with them.
Sure. Yeah. And to be honest with you, that's why I coach. I tell my guys this all the time. You're at the end of 4 years. I hope at the end of 4 years we're the exciting part for me is when you're done, because then we become peers.
Right.
That's what I tell the guys, and I enjoy this. I enjoy the interaction. I enjoy having these guys' families over to my house, right, or going out, grabbing dinner with these guys and seeing what's going on with their life. It's a lot easier now with social media to stay up to speed with all these kids that have come through your program, So that's the most enjoyable part about my job, when we can go out a year or two later, tell a story, maybe have a beer together and hear the funny stories and talk on a peer-to-peer basis. So I love that part of my job. And that's what keeps me motivated to continue in this hard field to a certain point.
Yeah. Well, and I think you would know, because you're kind of old school like me too. I want the kids to understand that when you're doing that with someone, to want to sit down and share a meal, to share a beer, share stories with them, that's a huge form of respect. Because to recognize someone as a peer, that is a form of respect. It's like a handshake, when we were growing up. That's why this is kind of awkward, or the kid and play foot kick thing. Yeah. But, it's something that, hey, you know what, we've gone through some things together. We've worked some things out. We both have some common experiences. Now let's sit down and talk about it and enjoy looking back and how we came through it.
For sure. Yeah. That's, again, it's a highlight. And we talked a little bit about family. My kids and my wife have been semi-involved, not overly involved in the program, but they're there. Dad comes home after a doubleheader, taking 2 on the chin. Yeah. Dad's not talking on a Saturday afternoon, after that. So they've been through the good and the bad time, but they've also been involved enough. And when you're around great people, like our current and former Cougars at APU, it's easy to bring my kids around that. Yeah. They become instant role models for my kids. They're coming out to dinner with my kids after and when they're alums. So it does become a larger community.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love every bit of that.
Yeah, which even that too, for you as a family man to bring your family around the baseball field, where traditionally it can be a little salty sometimes, but if you're bringing your kids out, you're showing your team that respect. Hey, I know you're gonna treat my son the way I treat you. I know you guys are gonna watch out for him the same way I watch out for you. So I'm kind of giving you my blessing to impart whatever on my son the same way I do to you, which again is another sign of respect. So I think sometimes younger kids don't realize the flattery or the things that you're showing them by your actions.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a high level of trust.
Yeah.
As a family guy, your family's the most important thing in your life.
Yeah.
And so I trust you guys enough that my 6, 7, 8, 10, now 17-year-old son can hang out with you, and you're going to feed into him what coach's expectation is to a certain point, So yeah, that's been pretty cool,
I mean, that's great. That's one of those highlights, like I said, that as a coach, that probably goes ahead of a lot of wins, something like that.
For sure.
Now, you mentioned again, I know you're from Boston, but maybe the people listening, so it's a big year for you. Lakers, Dodgers.
Oh, jeez. I know. I almost wore my Red Sox hat, being in California here. Yeah, we took a hit, but, I grew up, again, in the 80s and 90s in Boston. Right. So there was a point when we were rooting for New England and people were in bags over there, trash bags over their head like they used to with the Saints. You remember those days.
Oh,
yeah. And so to get 6 Super Bowls from Tom Brady, I'm like, we've had our run, and I lived through the 86 years and no World Series with Boston.
Yeah.
I was there in 86 when the ball went through Buckner's legs. I was there when, my old man was ready to pop a bottle of champagne because we were going to win this thing, and then we kicked it, know. So to see the Red Sox win 3, I think since then, somewhere around there, and get to experience guys like David Ortiz and even Mookie.
Yeah.
We take a little part of that World Series with the Dodgers because Mookie was our guy.
Yeah.
And he's such a great baseball player, and probably more importantly, it sounds like he's just a phenomenal person and a great leader. So yeah, it was a tough time in the Lakers, but I was a Larry Bird, Magic Johnson heyday guy, but at the end of the day, being a transplant to California, I'm happy for all my friends that are excited.
I'm a Padre fan, so I was just pumped, and I tell my daughter, of course, the year that we can't actually go and experience the playoffs, they're going to get all the way to the. Yeah. But it was still fun to see. Interesting when we were listening to all the things about. I forget. I think it's Cash, his last name. The Rays manager, is it Cash?
Yeah, that's right.
When he pulled Snell, and then they go back and they're telling the stories about the '86 World Series when was it Stapleton? I think was their first baseman.
Yeah.
And he goes to, was it Morgan? Was it Joe Morgan, or who was there? Or McNamara.
McNamara.
Yeah. He asked McNamara, "Hey, you want me to go in first?" He says, "No, I want Buckner out there when we celebrate." And then, of course, but that's one of those things where unless you're in the dugout, you don't really understand that part of it.
Right.
What were the odds of that ball finding Buckner in that time? He was just out there to kind of maybe catch one strikeout, pop up, and we're celebrating. But now he's went down in history. But it's just it's funny how those kind of stories come out after the fact, and you talk about coaching, and you kind of wonder as a coach, man, I'm glad not everything that I've done and every decision I've made has been documented, because there's probably a few mistakes. But I mean, that's the fun part of it. You make the decision based on the information you have, and as a coach, you're with the guy more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So if this guy's having a bad day, if this guy's stomach was hurting, this guy had a headache, well, that's why I'm not putting him in, because I knew stuff that you didn't. But it's always just fun to watch, and I enjoy listening to the criticism of everybody. It's a little different when you're sitting there and you have an attachment to these guys, and he took him out because he wanted the best for him. He didn't necessarily do it because he wanted to throw the team under. You don't think about that part, but. So a couple things going back, and I'm just kind of listening to our chat, but how's your tech now? We talked about the Zoom meetings. You talked about the Rapsodo.
It's not great. I mean, I'm not super at it, but I'm trying to educate myself. We've tried to do the best we can with Zoom. I mean, all at the end of the spring, because the kids lost their season March 15th or whenever it was, St. Patrick's Day, actually. That was a tough day for me as a Boston guy. We got called by our AD and said, Fresno, we were supposed to play Fresno Pacific that day. The game got canceled. Tom Brady just signed with Tampa Bay And it was St. Patty's Day, and nothing was open. Yeah. So it was a tough day for a Boston Irish guy, you know.
Yeah, I can imagine.
At the end of the day, though, we tried to do we have a number of players that are still playing professional baseball and in the big leagues, a few guys. And so we tried to take advantage of that springtime with Zoom. Mm-hmm. The pro guys were off too, right, because of the pandemic. So we would do, 2-3 days a week. Within our allotted time, NCAA, keeping our hours at whatever minimum we need to keep them at. And we did a lot of mental development stuff. We had Stephen Vogt of the Arizona Diamondbacks on a Zoom. We did a pitching Zoom with him, a hitting Zoom, a catching Zoom. Kirk Neuenhuis, who played with the Mets for 5-6 years, who's now my full-time assistant at APU. Having those two on a Zoom with 35 guys, and then they're talking hitting, and they're like, when I played with Justin Turner, these are some of the things it's like firsthand information. Or when I was with Buster Posey out at San Francisco, you know, so you have 19 to 21-year-old kids getting kind of like almost firsthand access to what they see on TV.
Well, and even now from young guys, 50 years of experience between the two of them, so that says a lot at all different levels, from your place all the way up. So as far as the tech stuff, how have you been on the recruiting? A lot of the meetings have been through Zoom or Google Meet or whatever.
They have been. Yeah, I haven't done that. A lot of my coaches, my daughter plays volleyball at Azusa Pacific. Okay. So she was just told me she was coming back to watch the Pats on Monday night. She said, hey, I'm going to be an hour late. I'm going to be on a recruiting Zoom call with coach for an incoming kid that he's trying to recruit. So I think he's ahead of the game. He's using it really well. And, when you hear that from your daughter, from one of the coaches that she has, and you're like, oh, Dad doesn't do that. I haven't got there yet. So I'm staying on the phone with guys, a lot of texting, probably old school tech. In some fashion, it's a very tough landscape for 2021s.
Sure.
Everybody's impacted. They're bringing back, these power fifth-year seniors because they got their year back.
Yeah.
We did the same thing. Probably out of 10 seniors, 8 decided to come back and play another year. Mm-hmm. That really impacts what you're doing recruiting-wise. But we were probably 2 years out that we had seen enough of the class that hopefully today's signing day. So congrats to all the kids out there signing, right? I know it's an exciting time for you and your families. Yeah. For the future Cougs that are out there, I'm super excited about our class that's going to sign today. We had seen them the summer before. Mm-hmm. What was really hard is they gave us a dead period, the NCAA, where you couldn't go out and evaluate. Right. I'm sure you experienced that trying to get your kids placed. So we had already identified these kids that are hopefully going to sign today. We've had to do video work, right? Identify off a video. That's not the easiest thing to do. I laugh, I kid around. My first recruit at APU was Stephen Vogt.
Okay.
And he was recruited off a video in March of his senior year, or February of his senior year. Baseball Factory.
Okay.
Yeah. The CDs that they used to send out.
I was going to ask if it was a VHS.
It was a CD. It was a CD. And Jeff Ishii, who's now an advanced scout. Remember Jeff? Yeah. With advanced scout with St. Louis, having a great baseball career. He started coaching with us at APU then. Okay. You remember? I don't know if you remember that early 2000s.
Right as we were starting to come in and use your place all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, Ish was there. So he was grinding me about recruiting. Okay, and he was like, hey, I want to recruit. And I'm like, he's never coached before, right, in my mind.
Yeah.
And so I said, I saw the CD. I got it in the mail, Baseball Factory. I said, hey, Jeff, I flipped him the CD. I said, go, thousands of kids on it, right? Yeah. I said, go find me the top 10, right? And then I figured it would be a good opportunity for the two of us to learn what each one of us likes in recruiting. Literally, he comes back the next day. He goes, I watched every kid on there. He goes, I want you to watch this kid from Visalia. And it was Vogt. It was Stephen Vogt.
Wow.
We put it in the computer, and I watched 3 swings. And I was like, eesh, this kid looks amazing. I started calling him. Mm-hmm. I said, hey, Stephen, it's Paul Svagdis at Azusa Pacific. I'm first-year coach here. I know it's late in your, it's the spring of your senior year. Have you committed anywhere? Have you signed anywhere? I haven't.
Wow.
His brother, Danny, who we're all real close with now, was at Westmont, so he knew our league, the GSAC. I said, I offered him on the phone right there after 3 swings on the video, and I said, when's your next game? He said, tomorrow. I canceled practice, And I drove up with Ishii. I said, we're going to go out to dinner because we could do that at the NAI. Right. We're going to take, you could pretty much do anything at the NAI at that point. We're going to take you out to dinner, and so you can meet us because we really want you. So anyways, going back to TAC, like, that's probably the best guy we've ever recruited. Kirk Neuenhuis, who played with the Mets, big leaguer, 100th overall pick in the draft in 2008. We had to evaluate him off of video. He was a Colorado kid.
Yeah.
And that was the old VHS. There was no CD then. And Jeff and I put it in, and we were like, all right, I like this guy. Mm-hmm. He came out to work out. We got rain. We never get rain in Selleck, California. All he did is play ping pong in our clubhouse for 3 days. So we couldn't work him out, so we just had to make a call. So I'm not opposed to evaluating guys off of video. It's certainly we'd rather be there in person, though, right? So you have to do a little bit of that now, more than I probably used to.
You keep any of those CDs or the VHS?
I wish I did. I should have kept all that. I mean, probably historical for our program.
Right, for the program, and then probably at some point you'd never be able to play it because you can't find one anymore.
Yeah, that's
But I
mean,
it would just be kind of cool to go, here's this guy, this guy, this guy. But, as far as that goes, I think it's kind of cool because there's different, there's different schools of thought. I was joking with Smitty. You remember Matt Smith?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So during the Dodger game, everybody was kind of goofing around on Jensen.
Yeah.
And so I was texting him, and then we were watching Gerbino, and I forgot the shortstop's name for Tampa. I think he hit like one ball all series.
Yeah.
And so I text Smitty and I said, hey, does sabermetrics tell you that this guy's not going to hit at all? If they do, then why is he playing? Put a third baseman in there and just, because they need runs. They don't need defense right now.
Right.
So, we were talking about that, and I just said, I don't understand all of it. Maybe that's part of it, where I'm still at that point where you can tell me it spins this fast, you can tell me it does this, but until there's a guy standing there with a stick on the other end, that's what I need to know.
Sure.
Is it going to get past him? It's great. It looks pretty. It does all the funny things on the video, but all of a sudden this guy puts a bat to it and all that goes out the window.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that when you talk about technology. I've probably gone through an iPad a year. One, because I get a little fired up. One, when I just Gronk spiked it on the concrete one day because a guy was scrolling through his swings like he's J.D. Martinez 5 minutes before the game. Right. I was like, hey, let me see that. Whack! Because it does come down to competing a little bit. And then now I'm trying to do the Rhapsodo, and I'm trying to get it synced up and online, and my right-handed pitcher's trying to throw a bullpen. And it's, hey, 100% spin efficiency. I'm like, yeah, my 20 years of coaching could have told you that.
Yeah.
Oh, that the iPad said your slider didn't look very good. It's not very good right now. You need a little more movement, a little more tilt, a little more spin, you know? So I always kid around with my guys because they're all young and they want the technology. I'm like, hey, coaches innately know what a good slider is. Yeah. I don't need some iPad. You don't need to look at the iPad. I'll just tell you that's good or it's crappy. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that where you battle that, and we laugh about it. But I do think it used properly. Now going back to the World Series, I'm not sure why you take Snell out of the game, right? And you got Mookie, who's had a tough time hitting him. Yeah. And I know Mookie's Mookie. And I know your numbers, your sabermetrics or whatever probably tell you, hey, after 3 times around the order, you got to flip it. Mm-hmm. But there has to be some instinctual stuff that goes along with it. And I certainly, I have no idea what it's like to coach at the professional level. Sure. So I say this with all humility. But as a fan, I sit back and go, keep your greatest competitor in the moment.
Sure.
Now I speak out of 2 sides of my mouth. I was also there when Grady Little for the Red Sox left in Pedro Martinez in the ALCS against the Yankees because he went out and he wanted to pull him. Pedro talked him out of it, and Pedro gave up the runs to the Yankees, and that was another. We were like, oh, it's going to be another 86 years until we, take care of the Yankees. So it's a give and take, right? It's a give and take. You saw the momentum. I don't know if you saw, as soon as they pulled him, I looked over, they flashed the dugout, and Mookie looked over at Dave Roberts and put a big smile. Even just psychologically, he went to the plate thinking, we're going to win this game now. So I think it's give and take. We just got to balance it out. Anytime something new comes in the game, we have to figure out where it fits and how to mesh the two ideas.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I was going to go with you, because we had talked about that too. I didn't hear it. I mean, we were at the shop and we were listening to the game, but I remember all that day at the school listening to all the Dodger fans, and I kept telling them, I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't wrap that trophy up too quick. I go, whatever he is or isn't, the guy's got a Cy Young sitting on his shelf at home. So it's in there.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he hasn't got it out there every game this year, but after everything he went through, all the quarantine, all the stuff they've had to go through, this could be his last game. He's going to find it somewhere, and he's going to fight, and they're going to have to drag him off that mound, which they ended up doing. And for those 2 times through the lineup, he was there. Now, again, unless you've actually been in a dugout, and a machine can't tell you this, as a hitter, if a guy's been just wiping you out and you're off on every pitch, I'm guessing this, he's throwing that. I'm guessing right, he's throwing up or left. And so I know as a hitter mentally that I got nothing for him today.
Yeah.
Now you're going to do my job for him because our goal is to knock that starter out.
Right.
Now you're going to take him out for us. Well, of course, I feel better because now my chances went up. I don't even know who you're bringing in, but I feel better about not having to face that guy.
Right.
That's something you can't find in any piece of equipment. That
sure.
mental, and when your dugout, the vibe is just down. Like this guy, we're making this guy look like the best ever, and nobody in my dugout shows me that they feel like we can get this guy.
For sure.
And it just happens. It's human nature. And so
when you can get, and even at our level, the amateur level, I mean, we're trying to knock the starter out of the game.
Yeah.
When that guy's dominating and you get him out of the game, there's almost like a collective okay, here we go. It just completely changes your mindset. You go 180 degrees from we can't figure this guy out to they might pull him after 6 and go, we got 3 innings now?
Yeah.
We could do this,
Yeah.
And it just really changed the mindset.
Yeah.
Now I don't have a question for you, but talking baseball because I'm enjoying this.
Yeah.
Here's the thing and I'm not smart enough to figure this out, but I know the metrics and the numbers dictate a lot of big league baseball now. Okay. This athlete, after so many innings, you have to pull him because then you get diminishing returns, right? Maybe Snell's that guy.
Sure, yeah.
2 times around the order or 3, whatever it is. I don't know a lot about, regression analysis and statistics. I probably should. I was an economics major undergrad. I have no idea about that stuff. But here's what I do know. They're based on thousands and thousands of data points. And baseball, 162 games, or you're a big leaguer for 3 or 4 years, you have those data points. How much of that, this is the question I would ask like the bright people in baseball. This is like going to Vegas. The odds are stacked against me. But when I go one day and I get hot, right? So for me, it's like playoffs are a 7-game series. I don't think those numbers over 1,000 games necessarily dictate a 7-game series.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because over a 7-game series, those are the games that Kershaw could have. Those might have been his 8 or 9 inning games. Because do you know what I mean? Like you can't project it out that all those numbers are going to work in a 5 to 7 game series. I don't think it fully works that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know the math to figure that out. Right? Does that make sense? It's like flipping a coin. If I flip it 1,000 times, the first 500 might be heads, but odds are the next 500 are going to be tails. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, I understand the percentages, and that's just how it is. I mean, you can sit and factor in how many ground balls are going to go to the right, go to the left, things like that. We understand those percentages, but sports has always been that human element.
Yeah.
That one guy on that one day, digging deep or finding, Jack Morris 10 innings on, in the World Series Game 7. I mean, that's the one thing I remember telling somebody when they pulled him out. I'm like, man, this is the World Series where heroes are made.
Yeah.
Don't take that from that guy.
Right.
Here's your best guy, your Cy Young guy, your Game 6 guy that was going to get us to Game 7. Go with him.
Right.
If I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose with my best guy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would have had to feel really, really, really strong about whoever else was in that bullpen before I pulled him out.
Sure.
Because it's just one of those things where, there's certain guys, and it's no disrespect to the other ones, and most of your team would tell you. If you look in a basketball, they all know, I want Jordan shooting that ball. I want LeBron shooting that ball. Don't throw it to me. There's always those guys.
Right.
So you have to kind of let them go and see what they're going to do. And sometimes, like with Pedro, it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
But you know what? If we play that scenario 9 times out of 10, like you said, he's probably going to win 8 or 9 of those.
As hard as it was for me to watch, I remember I was there with my kids. They were munchkins then.
Yeah.
And we thought we were going to win this thing. We had the lead and go to the World Series, right? And they hadn't won one yet. And when he made the move and I saw him turn around and walk off the mound, I said to my son and my daughter, who were big fans, I go, good call, even though it wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, he got fired that
Yeah.
year. He got fired for making that call. I'm like, hey man, Pedro's been our guy all year, and if Pedro says he's going to take care of it, let him take care of it. But that goes back to a little older school, maybe a little more relational, right? What do I want to go home? Am I going to go home at the end of the night and be able to close my eyes and fall asleep knowing I went with my best guy?
Yeah.
Or am I going to go home and regret I went with numbers?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd rather go home and go, you know what? Pedro didn't get it done, but give him 10 more other starts. He's 8 out of those 10 times he's going to do it.
And that's just how it works. It's funny because as you're saying that, I was thinking about the Patriots and that game the other night with the Saints and the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
I'm not a Brady fan. I mean, he's a great player, all this stuff, but I'm a Dolphin fan, so we've been eating it from Brady for it feels like 40 years. But you know, last night when they're getting boat raced, I still watched it because I'm thinking, okay, this is just going to be one of those. It's going to take him 6 minutes, and they're going to put 4 touchdowns up. Now it just means he's not handing the ball off. And I kept watching. I'm like, okay, now it's going to really be good because he's only got 4 minutes left to do it, and it never happened. But you've seen him do it so many times.
Right.
If you were going to lay money, you would probably lay it on he's going to pull it off.
Absolutely.
And that happened to be the night that it just didn't work. You know. But how many times have you seen that happen? I mean, I think that was the only time he's been beat that bad.
Yeah, I think it was
20 years.
Highest point differential in his career.
Yeah, and so that's one of those where, you know, I'm thinking whoever's out there with him, it could be all third string guys or guys they pulled up, but as long as they can catch a football, he's going to hit him in the chest. It just didn't happen, but that's kind of that same mentality you have with certain guys.
Right.
You just trust them that much, and you know, if your livelihood as a manager or a head coach and whatever is on it, you think that's the soundest decision to make.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just curious to see that kind of stuff, but you know, now it's a trend, you know, and you have to kind of use it. And I've had a couple guys talk about it. Mikey's really big on that. Serena.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, when he was in here, we were talking about that, and I said the same thing too. But he's a lot younger, and I go, you understand all that stuff, dude. I go, I still turn the L screen, and when my guys are pitching, I just stand there and I go, nope, that didn't bother me. Nope, that didn't bother, you know. And they'll ask me, how'd that look? I go, well, I'm 50-something years old, so anything coming at me that fast, I'm going to move. Yeah. So if I don't feel threatened by it, somebody younger is definitely not going to. So.
Matty, remember Matt Venegas? You worked with Matty Venegas, you know, so Matt and I have been together, one of the best people I've been around, great coach. And, you know, we get access to some stats, some information on hitters. And then you've been playing these guys for a while, and they've been playing as freshmen. So, and Matty was our recruiting coordinator. He's done a phenomenal job for us, really incredible things since we've moved Division II with Matt. He's not with us now. He was laughing. He was telling a story with some alum, and it got back to me because we were all laughing about it. We might have been on a Zoom together or something. And he moved the infield like we're the Dodgers, you know, where I got a fourth outfielder and field, you know, and he's moving the infield. And I'm an old school guy, and I'm sitting in the chair, and sure enough, you know, the ball's hit in the, you know, at the shortstop vacated area, and they scored 2 runs. I give him this one right in the side of the thigh because we sit next to each other. And Matty was telling, it was Rob Ruiz at Westmont. That's why I got it back to Rob. He goes, yeah, we were laughing on the phone the time you punched him right in the thigh. Dude, because he moved the guys all the way over to the right side of the infield. But, you know, at the end of the day, like it's a hard transition for us collegiately. Sure. We don't have the access to that kind of data.
Right.
So I don't push back against it because I think with assistant coaches, if you're going to give them some ownership in what they're doing and you want to show them trust, and hey, you're trying to win just like I am. Yeah. And if you really believe this is going to put us in the right spot, I got to give them that level of ownership. But just the intensity came out, and I gave him a little love tap on the thigh, you know.
Well, I mean, even with that too, you know, the difference is your schedule is about half. Of what a major league schedule is. Exactly. And so I talk about this with hitters because, you know, you get a lot of guys coming in and parents will ask me, oh, what about all this stuff I see with launch angle and this and that? I'm like, if you have 500 at-bats, flail away. Because you can strike out 200 times, you still got 300 to make it right. But when you're in high school and you got 60 at-bats, or you're in college and you might get 110 at-bats, those 50 fly balls, you probably get to about 20, and then coach is going to go, hey, why don't you let Billy take some hacks? Because I'm not going to wait for you to pop 4 balls out and just keep flying us out or keep flailing and missing balls. But it's one of those things where parents don't necessarily see the longevity of it. And, you know, talking to guys that, like, you know, like that have been in your program and now playing the pros, it's a different mentality when you've got 500 at bats. You can't do this every at bat.
Right.
You know, there's going to be some 0 for 4s. There's going to be some 3 for 4s. So I've got to kind of ride that out a little bit more even keel. And so when they're looking at that, it's easy to see the results, but how much is going into those results, you know? And I tell players that, look, at the high school level, which is mostly what we deal with, I still don't know too many college coaches that if they throw you 12 balls and 9 of them go to second base in the air, they're going to, and the one you rail off the middle, they're going to go, hey, I really like that one.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to focus more on the balls that you didn't elevate over the fence than what you put right back to the middle.
For
and
sure.
Conversely, it's going to work the other way. If you hit 9 right off that L screen where I'm throwing, I'm going to think, hey, this guy's on me. He's got it timed. He knows what he's doing. He's, you know, all the good things. So it's hard sometimes when they see that, and then also understand the fact that unless you've been on a field with those guys, those are all physical freaks.
Right. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're 6'3", 250, whatever, like Trout is, you can miss some balls on the handle and still drive it out. Right now, you can't with your aluminum bat.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's again, you can look at all of the things in videos and the launch angle and things, but it doesn't always play the same for everybody.
Sure. Yeah. And I would say this, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, we've been fortunate through the years, probably because of our location, SoCal, because of some of our history with guys playing professional baseball. We'll get a lot of, like, some former big leaguers that come down and they want to take some BP and do some different things. And so you get to watch those guys. And I think what gets lost in the shuffle with launch angles and some of the things we're seeing in these sound bites on Instagram, on Twitter, with some of the hitting instructors across the country, is I would get a chance sometimes, we do, watching these pro guys and big league guys hit. They are freaks, but you watch their process, and their process is about creating backspin and hitting line drives up the middle during BP. So I sometimes I'm throwing to them. They're like, hey, can we come down? And they know someone that knows someone. Yeah, I'll throw you BP. You're a big league guy, you know. And we get my assistants come down and you watch them, and they'll go 2 or 3 rounds where they're trying to hit the ball on the ground the other way, stay inside the ball, create some backspin. And they're really looking to spray the ball around until their last round, and then they can get into a couple balls. Yeah. But I think what gets lost in the shuffle for the kids and the parents is, you know, launch angles always existed. You know, Ken Griffey Jr. was hitting with launch angles. He was hitting 35 a year, right? Frank Thomas, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s. You know, Reggie Jackson. I mean, all these guys from the past. I think where it gets confusing for young kids is when we start to think about launch angles, it changes our swing path. Sure. And that's when we go, out of 10 swings, 9 are popped up to second base. Right. And all we really need to do is hit the ball out front a little bit, right? Stay on plane with the baseball. That's all stuff that every hitter has been doing for centuries. Right. So I just think that's where the crux comes in with some of the guys, because how they're viewing it in their mind is to get too steep with their swing, and that's why they pop everything up. Right. So it's again, that goes back to, like, when I was talking about just the balance, right? We've gone so far with the tech. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah. That we'll probably, I'm sure it'll dial back a little bit where they fit the tech in with good baseball. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Well, you know what's funny too, because that this year again was one of those, because it only gave us a snapshot. We had 60 games. Right. And I remember telling some players before, hey, look at those big number guys from last year. Yeah. And let's see what they do in a shorter time, because now you don't have 35 games to find your swing. If you don't find it in 35, you're probably only going to hit 8 or 9 home runs. You know, 35 games to get into it. Now you've still got more than half the season left to find that swing and get hot and start popping some balls out. Sure. Well, this year they didn't. So I think the top guy might have been Ozuna with like 20, but he's a good hitter. He's not an uphill guy. I mean, he's just a big, strong guy, and he'll take that line drive to right, or he'll hit that rod down the line and left. But most of those big home run guys, they didn't put up 20, 25, because now I don't have as many swing and misses opportunities that I did in the past. Right. So it kind of goes back to that whole, if I've got 500 swings, I know there's going to be some mistakes in there, but I'm okay because I still have more. You know, now if I don't have that much and I don't find it, I'm not going to get to those numbers. For sure. Yeah. That's a tough one. We even have it certainly at our level too. This is a hard dynamic of coaching. I've had multiple kids that have been All-Americans that if we play a 50-game schedule, after 18 games, they're hitting $180.
Yeah.
That's almost half our season.
Yeah.
And as a parent and a player on the team, you're like, who's the idiot that keeps running this guy out there? You know? And they you remember the Delgado brothers?
Yeah.
Do you remember Ryan Delgado and Anthony? So Ryan, I remember when he came in from Chafee, I remember he came over to the office. We were about 18 games in, and he was supposed to be like going to be our guy. And he was probably hitting sub 200, had hit one home run, and he was supposed to be a power guy for us. And I remember just telling him, I'm like, hey, bud, like, hey, relax, it's going to come. Well, it didn't feel like it because we were about 40% through this season. But, hey, I'm going to keep running you out there. And lo and behold, he ends up probably hitting 20 home runs in 30 games, right? Because once it can – that's baseball.
Yeah.
Those are the numbers of baseball. You never know when it's going to start to – you're going to get hot. We talk about that all the time, right? This guy got hot, something clicked, whether it's his timing clicked, right? Whether he had one hit that built some more confidence in him. So, I think the shortened season for the big leaguers was hard. It's really hard to tell, did I really have a bad year? Well, you didn't play 162.
Right.
That's a short season. You know, you can't define yourself right now on what this season looked like. And even on the flip side, if I hit 20 home runs, if you're projecting yourself hitting 75 that year because you hit 20 and 50, you know, it's probably not. It hasn't really happened. Maybe one time in the whatever, you know, McGuire and Sosa had that run, but at the end of the day, that's baseball, right? You know.
Well, and that's one of the cool things about it. You know, it's interesting too. And we can talk about this because we don't have that big of an age gap. But I was talking to players, and I'd always go back, and you probably get this too. You mention names, and they look at you like. All right, well, I'll explain who he is, and then I'll tell you the significance. But I was talking about Tony Gwynn, and I was telling him there's that stretch in the 80s where, you know, you had Mattingly, you had Gwynn, you had Boggs, and these guys were all 350, 360, 340. And then Gwynn had done it for 4 or 5 years, and then the knock in Southern California anywhere, we'll trade him because he didn't hit home runs. And so he gets tired of hearing this, and he can look on the back of his baseball card, and he goes from like 3, 5, 6, 8 to like 19, 20. And he said, I can do that anytime I want.
Right.
He says, but if I'm the only run, my job isn't to hit one run. My job is to start innings, you know. So the coolest thing is he just said, all I did was I started looking for different pitches. I started looking for inside balls that I could pull down the line, shortest part of the field.
Yeah.
And so now here's a guy that was hitting 360, 370, whatever it was, lifetime 330 something. And he just says, I can hit him if I want, but I'm going to lose some of the other things of my game. So he jumps on there from 6 to like 19 home runs that 1 year just because he said he could do it. Now, when you talk about being a good hitter and you talk about guys being able to stay inside and go, being able to control where you want that ball to go, being able to break the game down, slow it down that much to say, oh, okay, here's an inside pitch. I'm just going to take that one 330 down the line rather than, no, that's not the one I want. I want one to shoot in the gap and get on second and start an inning. That's, to me, the element of a great hitter. I mean, and again, I don't know too many people that would knock him for not having the home runs, but, you know, I don't know too many people that would say he wasn't a hard worker. He didn't work at it. He didn't study hitting. I mean, he was one of the few guys you could say was all about hitting when he did that. And so I use that as a reference more than the power guys.
Sure.
You know, because you always see there's these throughout the last 20 years, there's been these guys with these huge power numbers, and then they hit 230.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot of swing and miss in that one or two that they run into. So it's just a different approach and trying to get kids to see the overall, the process of it. You know, you're as a hitter, I've got this zone that I'm working with for the pitcher, and I want to block out as much of that as I can as a hitter, you know, until ultimately I'm chasing something I probably can't do, but I want to block out all of my spots. And that's what I'm working at as a hitter.
Sure. I think, you know, I grew up growing up in Boston, my dad telling me about Ted Williams and thinking about even technology and stuff, right? And I remember he bought me the book, The Science of Hitting. And Ted Williams had developed basically a heat map for himself. The square and I hit 410 over here and I hit 180 down here. So I leave that zone. I make them force the pitcher to pitch there, and I'm going to swing in this zone. You know, he obviously a perfect example of the combo that, well, I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest hitters of all time, that we would all want because he did drive the ball. But he also prided himself in hitting it in the gaps, getting on base, driving in runs, whether they came by home run, double, or single.
Yeah.
He had that ability. And then even taking it a step further, going back to technology, I remember, back in the 90s with guys like, I don't know if you remember Walt Hereniak or Charlie Lau, the linear hitting, right? And that was kind of the 90s, right? And I had an opportunity as a kid. Walt Hereniak used to use our college facility, and he'd bring in some big leaguers. Frank Thomas would come in when he was with the Chicago White Sox. Yeah. So a little college kid, I'd sit down and listen, and they'd be doing flips and sometimes get some swings with them. And I remember that at the time, that was a controversial thing. Hey, get down to the baseball, skate through the baseball, get off your backside, top hand release.
Right.
That's when top hand release became fashionable. Yeah. But it became fashionable, but it was controversial because it wasn't the old way. Then I went back to the science of hitting, and Ted Williams talked. He didn't have technology. He said you make contact on slightly upward swing, which was the antithesis of what the 90s. And even I hear Alex Rodriguez, I love listening to him on TV because I think he loves the game and he talks about, he's a 90s guy.
Sure.
Swing down to the baseball, create backspin, all the things that you and I probably grew up with.
Sure.
I think there's this like, not disconnect, but I think all of it applies.
Yeah.
Right? What they were doing in the 90s, that's might have been a mentality to get straight to the baseball.
Right.
But in order to drive the ball, we do need to hit it out in front of us.
Sure.
We do need to match the plane of the baseball.
Sure.
All those things have always applied. But this group has gone linear hitting, and this one's rotational.
Sure.
And this one is, all of these things, I think they all, our job, because you have to piece it all together, is how do you put it in a small enough package for your kids to be successful as hitters, to go off and play collegiately, if that's the goal, right? And for my kids, to put it into a package where they can understand it and it doesn't bog them down mentally.
Yeah.
Where they can drive the ball, where they can, in situations, hit the ball behind a runner,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's been our style. Our style. People would think we were a launch angle team. I want my 9-hitter to hit 20 home runs.
Right.
I want every hitter in our lineup to be a 4-hitter.
Sure.
Part of that's our yard.
Right.
Part of that is my style. I enjoy that style. It's more enjoyable for me as a coach. And I believe, regardless of your size and physicality, we can all drive 20 in the gap for doubles.
Sure.
Let's believe we can do that, and let's train to that end, right? So I do think there's a lot out there that's still, even with Ted Williams, he was saying the same stuff we're saying now.
Yeah.
Right? People were upset. Hey, Ted Williams doesn't know what he's talking about. He's talking about swinging up. You don't swing up. That's an uppercut. All these things that we like to poke holes at everybody.
Sure.
Versus, I think for me as a coach, I just try, okay, how does that apply to my kids? Is there something of value with this guy on Twitter? Oh, yeah, okay, I'll take that. No, he's doing flips from behind. I've never seen a pitch come from behind the catcher to me. I'm not going to do flips from behind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So taking what you think is going to be the best to help your kid develop that line drive swing, that backspin swing that we all want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean that's really interesting because when you mention Walt Hereniak, the first thing I think about is Harold Baines and Frank Thomas on that front foot.
Front foot, yeah.
And then
back foot off the ground.
Right, and he's making that downward approach. And then you have Charlie Lau, who was George Brett, and everything was back and through the ball, which you create a little bit of an angle. But Brett was a high average hitter too, and he hit home runs, so he did both. But I remember looking at both of those, and I remember having all of those books. And you know what, if I could have put that much energy into my schoolwork, I probably have more highlights in all of those, Charlie Lau and all of those hitting books. I have more highlights through them than any of my school books put together. But when I went through those, you go through and you just, like you said, you read them and no, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, yeah, I like this. Let's highlight this. Let's go back. And you start looking to them together, and there is a lot of those elements that would mesh. If you could get one of those screens that they have on Major League Baseball where the swing path matches, there's a lot of things that match.
Absolutely.
And I think going into what you and I were talking about before we started, how now that you've had more time to work one-on-one, that's where that relationship comes in. You're kind of like a tutor now, to where before you were teaching to a class.
That's right.
And so now I can break things down because maybe you process things different than he does. I can tell him and give him something to read. He's going to go, oh, okay, I understand what he means. I need to actually show you and have you imitate me to understand that, because I read the book and it was confusing to me, but now I can break it down for you and you don't have to go through all the confusing part. And so I think that's where that relationship element means, because you can weed out a lot of the confusing things because of experience and seeing different hitters, and you know how to kind of give them the direct points.
Sure.
And that's where I think you're seeing a lot of that advancement right now with your guys being one-on-one, because you're able to just kind of give them the cliff notes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And it's I would certainly love to be out on the field right now with the whole team, right? But I do think that big group dynamic, especially as a head coach, you become a manager of everything.
Right.
So you're floating from this drill to that drill to the bullpens, and you want every kid on the team to feel like you're actively involved in the process of their development, but you get spread thin, right? And now we have one coach doing the work right now. It's the head coach. We have small groups, two, 3 kids at a time.
Yeah.
We do our drill work every day. It's an hour session. And it's really that, and it's done in a fashion, like you said, where you're developing these individual skill sets. So for me, like, I walked out of the last 6-week period because we finished yesterday. And I was like, with all the guys that have been coming down, man, think about where your swings are now from where they were on October 1st. Like, swing past, staying through balls, each kid working on something a little individual to them, like the next piece of the puzzle for their development. It's been awesome. I've loved it.
Well, and you're going to get another reward on that when you guys get to work as a group, because now when they're working on their own, they have a direct path to work on something specific.
That's right.
And so when they go out, you're going to realize, hey, I've got a lot less that I've got to work on when they're hitting. Now they're just applying what we've been working on, because they've been doing the repetitions, to where during a normal season we don't have time for all that.
That's right.
We got a little bit of cage time, we got X amount, we got to get to this. And so now all of these kids are getting to focus on their individual improvement, which is phenomenal. And I think I'm excited to see where overall, because some of the guys on your team that maybe were going to be fighting for a little bit of playing time, maybe they've taken the initiative and gone higher. I mean, I've got kids that, and I'm proud of all of them, just because they've been working all the way through and kind of going on that faith that they're going to play, and they don't know when. And, as an athlete, everything's on a time. Hey, my season is 6 weeks away, or I'm going to pitch in a week. I'm going to, and I've got kids that have lost 30 pounds. I've got kids that have been hitting every week. They've been lifting. I've got 2 or 3 kids that I actually gave them a diet to put on weight. So every time they come in, hey, where are we at? I'm up 1 pound. Okay, good. One's good. We just want to keep going up. But a lot of the kids that have wrapped their head around, hey, let's not mope about what's going on. Let's take this time and let's use it properly, because when we start, you're not going to have the same amount of practice time that you normally do. So it's going to be, let's get ready and go.
That's right.
And you're going to really be able to tell who was taking this time to get ready.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I know, a lot of programs at the college level, at least at my level anyways, we're all led by we all have different leadership at universities, right? So we view COVID-19 differently.
Sure.
Some of our peer schools are practicing every day. Some of them in the CC2A aren't practicing at all. We're at least getting some individual work at Azusa Pacific, which is a huge blessing for us, as we talked.
Sure.
One of the things I try to tell the kids, going back to being positive, like, I'm not worried about what other people are doing. It's like, this is life. This is a good life lesson. Why are you worried about what they're doing over there when we can control whatever we're given? Let's control that portion of it. Does that make sense? And I think in life that happens too. COVID-19 hit and you're told you can't go into the office anymore.
Right.
Your season's done and you can't go into the office. You could go into a black hole pretty quick. You're trying to emotionally help your kids get through this. Your seniors losing their senior year. We're all trying to figure out, how bad is this pandemic?
Sure.
We have all those things going on. Probably after a week or two, after probably self-loathing and just going, what's going on in the world, I think self-regulated, going back to what you're talking about right now, this stuff that your young kids are doing, either putting weight on or taking weight off, even without knowing what the outcome's going to be in the spring for these CIF kids and even college kids at my level.
Yeah.
This idea of self-regulation and self-motivation. Well, I'm going to take advantage of the time I do have.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get my body better. Yeah. And I'm going to get my swing better. Yeah. Right? I'm going to go down to Ernie, and I'm going to get my swing better, and I'm going to get my body better, and I'm going to be prepared for that moment when the bell rings. Yeah. And so those were the things that I was trying to tell my team all summer. And in the fall, it's not worried about anybody else. What can you do now? And I think it's a huge lesson for all our kids, your kids, my kids, that they're going to be able to look in the mirror a year from now and go, yeah, I did what I needed to do, right? I didn't let the circumstances of our life right now dictate how I was going to go out and live each day. Yeah. And I think that's a huge lesson, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's one of those things where we might look back on it and go, hey, there was something positive that came out of this. And, even some of the high school kids that I was talking to, got the progress reports, Coach, I'm a 4.0. I'm like, really? Yeah. He's like, yeah, I've only been like a 3.2, whatever. And I said, hey, he goes, yeah, but my sister and my brother have both always been 4 point, but they're telling me, oh, it's because of the COVID and this and that. And I said, hey, you don't put the teams on your schedule. You just play the schedule that they gave you. Yeah. And you can't help it if all those teams are 0-8 when they get to you. This is how they laid it out. You're taking advantage of it. You're doing the work. That's the grades you earned. That's what it goes with. That's how it's going to go down. And I said, so you could have easily gone the other way and just done minimal work and been okay with just passing, but you didn't. Right. You did everything they asked you to do. And I said, that's all you can do. And just take it as positive. Hey, if your grades end up coming up out of this, everyone's in the same boat. Everyone's learning the same. Everyone's having to do the same type of classwork. So I'm sure not everybody jumped up to a 4.2. Be happy with it and keep it rolling.
Yeah, yeah. For sure.
So now I got to take us all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
The kind of premise of the show is that we talk about how you got to APU where you are, and that's why we call it Journey. So what I would normally do, but like I said, I knew we were gonna. That's why I told you kind of 60 minutes, 90 minutes, but we could probably, if we had some food here, we'd probably be here for 5 hours.
I love it.
But so what I want to do is I want to kind of let you tell everyone about Coach Svagdis, how you became the head coach at APU. Where did you start? And Coach, you can go all the way back to your first home run in Little League if you want.
Yeah, I don't want to go that far back. I grew up New England kid, Boston kid, went to college at Tufts University, had a great experience. Chose that school because I think I was in love with football as a high school kid, and played baseball to a certain point, and but might have maybe been a little better baseball player than a football player and a small school athlete collegially. And so I was fortunate. Coach John Casey out at Tufts, he's still there. He's 35 years in now. He's been a big mentor of mine. In fact, his son played for me at APU, came all the way out for Boston. So that's a cool full circle as a coach. Coaching your own coach's son,
Did you out-recruit him or did you?
I did, yeah, of course I did. And I tell Coach Casey all the time, Brendan was a heck of a lot better playing for me than he would have been for you. But aside from that, I went to Tufts. I played 2 sports there, loved it. Didn't know when I graduated, because I was playing 2 sports and had this weird idea that, I guess you can just play sports your whole life. I didn't think it was ever going to end. All my friends were doing internships in New York City and Chicago and all these places, commercial real estate, doing really highly successful professional careers. That was their path. I really didn't do any of that. I just played football and baseball in college, tried to get decent grades, and then when I got done, I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Nobody's calling me to play baseball, know. And Tufts had a graduate assistant program, GA program, coach football and baseball. They paid for a master's, so I jumped on it. There were 2 things in my life when I was a young kid. I don't want to say I despised, because I always loved my coaches. I loved my high school coaches. They were great mentors. I love my college coaches. But I said I would never want to be an umpire, because I just, all the umpires. I don't have a great history with umpires. And secondly, I didn't want to be a coach, because in my mind I was like, I just like playing. I don't want to sit in the dugout put these guys on and call plays from the sidelines. I don't want to do that. Right. But when I realized, what am I going to do with my life, and they were going to pay for a master's, I jumped on it. And I remember I was telling this story to one of my players who might GA for me in a year or 2. He's a junior now, because we had talked about this. I said, I remember the first football practice, and I was standing behind. I coached linebackers, and I had a whole group to myself as a first-year coach. I had the linebackers. Mm-hmm. That's what I played in college. They gave me that position. And I remember after the first practice out on the football field, I called my grandfather, who was a big football fan, an old school guy. Mm-hmm. And I said, Gramps, right? You know, you have these names for your grandparents. I said, hey, Gramps. He said, how was it? I said, I'm hooked. He goes, and he goes, I knew you would be. And from that point on, I said, I want to be a coach. Mm-hmm. I did 3 years there doing 2 sports. I got an interview at Pomona College, the Claremont colleges.
Okay. Yeah.
Roger Karen was the head football coach there at the time. He was a Boston guy, Harvard guy. The AD was a New England guy. So they flew me out for an interview. I had coached 3 years as a grad assistant. It was a head baseball assistant football job over there. And I got it. And, you know, I was 25 years old, just got done with my master's. I remember I got off the phone, I got offered the job, and my wife and I, we'd just been married 9 months to a year. And I said, hey, I just got the Pomona job. We're moving to California. And she's a California girl anyways.
Okay.
She's from San Francisco.
Okay.
That wasn't purposeful. It's just, you know, no internet. Back then you looked through collegiate baseball and collegiate magazines for job opportunities.
Okay, that was going to be my next question.
How'd you figure it out?
That's a big jump from...
Yeah, from New England to California.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was the NCAA News, right?
Okay.
It was a publication, and they had like, you know, want ads for positions that were opening. So I knew I was done with my master's, and I said, well, I got to apply some full-time jobs. I'm married. I got to make some real money. I was delivering pizzas till 2 a.m. after practice, you know, a couple days a week. My wife was going to grad school, and she was working around the clock. And one of the jobs that opened up was Pomona Pitzer out here in California. And, you know, fortunately, you know, God bless us, and I got the job. I don't know how I got it, to be honest with you. I think I was the odd man out of the 3 people they interviewed, if that makes sense. You know how when you interview people, they were like, all right, he's the lesser of all evils. I don't think it was, they were so excited to get this knucklehead 25-year-old from Boston, you know.
Right.
And so I went out, coached football and baseball there for 6 seasons. Loved every bit of it. Football was really difficult because it's even at a Division III level, it was 7 days a week. You know, and my daughter, about 4 years into being the head baseball assistant football over there at Pomona, my daughter Emma was born, and I was coming to the realization that the 80-hour week that I was working really wasn't working for our family.
Right.
And so I talked about it, prayed about it with my wife, talked about changing my career, to be honest with you. I even went into the athletic director at the time, who was a good friend of mine, who's still over there. He's a basketball coach. And I said, hey, Charlie, I don't think I can be a 2-sport coach. You know, the football season is 7 days a week. You know, I have no control over my time. And he said, yeah, I know it's hard. It's hard to have a family and coach. That was pretty much that conversation. And I remember committing with my wife at that point, and I said, hey, I'm done at the end of this year. Her and I talked about it. I had an economics degree and a master's, so I was like, I'll go work at a bank. My players laugh all the time because I'm like, you know what? I should have took that job with Bank of America. And I was like, I'll go work at a bank, 9 to 5, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make a decent living, coach my kids' little league, you know, be a dad, be a normal guy. And lo and behold, like literally that May, we get done with our season at Pomona, and those kids were phenomenal kids. I still am in touch with those kids. I was on Zoom calls with them they did some alumni Zoom calls, and I was able to Zoom in. Rob Ruiz was one of those kids at Westmont. He played for me at Pitzer. Bunch of great guys. And so I still stay in touch with, love that experience, but I knew it just doing 2 sports I couldn't keep the pace up.
So how did that work when you were doing 2? Did they not do, or are they not
no
allowed
fall.
to do anything?
No fall season because it's small division. It was small school. And at the time, they did it, most of the coaches, the model was, this is the 90s, that those small schools to not make ends meet, but to help with resources, a lot of 2-sport coaching.
I got you. Okay.
So my assistant at Pomona was the head soccer coach.
Yeah.
who knew nothing about baseball. Coach Schwartz, he probably won't listen. It's Coach Schwartz. We like that. And so he was assigned to me. I was assigned to football as a head baseball coach. It was really a football position.
Okay.
I think I got the job. In fact, I probably know I got the job because of my football background. And the head football coach wanted me there to coach football. What happened in that process was I became more of a baseball guy.
Gotcha.
Mentally, if that makes sense. Culturally, I like the individual work that we talked about.
Right.
You know, although I in my mind, I think to myself, I love football. I would love to be out on the football field every single day. Love the game. But I think what I've enjoyed the most, the difference between the two sports for me, was the individual work you get to do with baseball guys. You don't go out with a linebacker and do first step very often. You know what I mean? You don't put them on video and say, how's your technique? I mean, you do the broad scope.
Sure.
Hey, you're not filling the A gap, or, you know, you're not drop stepping the correct way in cover 3 and all those things. But you don't get the individual one-on-one time with the athletes like I think you do in baseball. It's like it's an individual sport that's played in a team format.
Right.
And I think growing through, you know, I coached 9 years collegiately of football, and as a 2-sport guy, and 9 years of baseball at the Division III level, I came to the realization that I really enjoyed the one-on-one time you get with your athletes as a baseball coach, and then that moved me to APU to a certain point, because I was going to go to a bank, and the APU job opened up. I didn't know it. You've got a phone call, APU job opened up. Would you be interested? No football. And I was like, whoa, like I didn't tell them that I was ready to be done coaching. I was like, well, maybe, you know, maybe God's opening this door for us.
Sure.
So my wife and I chatted about it, and, you know, it's 18 years later. It was just an amazing opportunity, and we're so blessed to be at a place like APU.
That's really interesting, because I'm sitting here staring at you. I'm trying to picture you as like a Jim Harbaugh or
a football guy,
clipboard thrower, a Gatorade. Well, you probably still kick buckets and throw clipboards, but in football it's a little different. I couldn't even imagine doing 2 sports right now.
Yeah, I don't think you can now.
It's just too much time commitment and too much recruiting, and
at all levels collegiately, it's become more specified. Is that the right word?
Specific,
sports specific. So even at the Division III level, like a lot, you know, when I started, some of the ADs were also coaching, right? Now they have 2 or 3 full-time ADs at the Division III level, just a football staff, just a baseball staff at a lot of these schools. And so it's changed quite a bit, because things that you're doing and these athletes that we're getting are much more prepared. And I think collegiately at all levels, higher education is starting to understand that for a lot of kids, their extracurricular component, whether they're performing arts kids, dancers, musicians, right? That's a huge part of their decision making when they go to college. Right. And so I think at all levels, we've ascended a little bit and become a little more, we've put more resources into those environments.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around mentally as a coach where you would switch gears, where you would decompress, where you would, because you kind of flow. And I mean, you're in almost competitive mindset year round. I mean, not that you aren't as a coach, but there's some, hey, I know this is recruiting time, I know this is downtime, I know this is development time, and you know, you have everything kind of nice and compartmentalized, but you almost essentially go from a short workout time to get ready into game mode right off the bat, and that's a whole different grind than the practices. And you know, I don't think you go home too many practices where you're completely miserable as you take 2 in a row. You know, it's a different going home and not eating. But man, that's amazing. 8 years.
8 years,
Wow.
8 years, round the clock. It was a lot. That's probably why after 9 years, actually, it was why after that 9th year, I was like, I can't do family and be a 2-sport coach at this level. You know, and like I said, I wasn't looking for other jobs. I remember when I talked to our AD, I just said, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. I love this program. The program had been doing great. Rob was playing for me. He was a junior at that point. And a bunch of great guys that were just excellent people, great baseball players. And I was like, hey, you need to start finding someone else. This is just, it's too much, you know, and maybe I made it too much, which we do as coaches psychologically, but, you know, it was obviously, I think I never regret putting your family first. You know?
And I don't think, you know, when you say maybe I made it too much, I think that's part of why it has to be separated, because the kids in the baseball program, swim, volleyball, whatever sport, now they've seen, like you said, that deserves your full attention. You know, and even if you're a great multitasker and a great organizer, mentally you can't give 100% to both sports. You know, and like you said, you have to have your hand in that development for every one of those kids. It's impossible with those numbers. You know, would you have 50, 60 guys on the football team and 35 guys on the baseball team? It's a lot of attention to spread around.
Yeah, and the big one was recruiting. I think there's this common. I'm a Division III guy at heart. That's where I grew up. That's where I cut my teeth as a head coach. The recruiting is harder. It takes more time. Yeah. Right? Because you're fighting every other school at every level to a certain point, you know. Especially in a sport like baseball. Yeah. You know, football, I wasn't ever cross recruiting with a higher level school in football because there's just a pure physicality issue. Right. But in baseball, we see Division III guys drafted fairly consistently out here in Southern California. Sure. So you might cross recruit with a bigger school or Division II or an NAI when you're D3. But I was having to recruit for football too. That was the hardest part. You know, with an expectation, you need to bring in, 8 to 10 like good guys. Yeah. And that was phone calls, 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. And we didn't have cell phones back then. Oh. You know what I mean? That's right. So if we did, it was in my glove compartment. I was like, hey, hon, if you get a flat tire, use the cell phone, but only use it then.
Right? The prepaid minutes.
Correct, yeah. So, you had to sit in the office till 9, 10 o'clock at night to make those calls. Yeah. To really entice a kid to look at a place like Pomona-Pitzer or wherever that school is.
That's kind of cool listening to that too, because you're kind of crossing those lines between, hey, when I was starting out as a coach, we had VHS or we had and now I can just sit at home on my coffee table and click through 500 kids.
Absolutely.
Binge watching if I feel like it. Yeah. Which is
And the kids now, it's actually the kids would rather probably have you text them. Yeah. They're so used to doing this. Yeah. When I talk to them, half the time they're like, they don't know what to say on the phone. So just a text to let them know, hey man, I was thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. I saw you had a couple knocks yesterday. Goes a long way, and it takes me 15 seconds.
You haven't accidentally sent a 70% to the wrong guy, have you?
No, I know.
So, oh, hey, you know what? That wasn't for you. That was.
Hey, I've been close to doing some things before. Yeah, that could have got me.
I was wondering about that when you were saying that. I'm thinking, you've done that before. I've sent stuff to some of my players, and I'll send them the little kissy emoji, and I'll text them back. I'm like, hey, I love you, but that's not what I meant to hit. I just got bad thumbs. But I'm wondering, when you do that kind of stuff, you probably keep the financial stuff out of that.
Yeah. I definitely don't. Very rarely am I emailing or texting that information. Yeah. I leave that up to our compliance people. I verbalize it, and then we get it squared away.
I can imagine, too, when you were talking about the recruiting, because I remember when I had Serena in here, and he was over at Pitzer. Yeah. And that's right. We were talking about the requirements and the academics, and we were talking about the financials. And I said, so you're looking for one needle in two haystacks, essentially.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because it's an even more special kind of kid that you have. And I remember talking to Aaron Swick up at Willamette.
Oh, yeah. Same type of school.
Yeah, when we were doing stuff, we were traveling around a lot, Addison and I, and so we went up there probably 3-4 years in a row, so I got to build a little relationship with him, and like I do, I'm sending him all these videos, and then finally he calls me, because we'd always gone through text, and he calls me and says, hey, brother, I love you, but all these guys you're sending me, he goes, I can't do anything with them. Yeah. And he says, I've learned that because of our requirements, everything's got to go through the office and compliance and academics, and he says, and then with us we have this long but like a thesis that they have to turn in to apply and things like that. And he says, so I can't fall in love with these guys because 9 out of 10 never even make it to the field. Yeah. And I'm like, well, it's good to know, because here I'm sending you guys thinking they can help, and I had no idea what it took to get in there. Yeah. But it's just different, because every different school has certain requirements and things like that. It's just interesting. That part of it I would really like to learn more, because I'm involved in baseball, and I have access to asking questions of coaches like you. But as a parent, I can imagine how overwhelming that is now because of the finances, and it is a big responsibility for them. And talking to the kids, they have no idea. Yeah, sure, I'll take it. Yeah. But they're not writing the checks, so that's something I definitely would like to learn a little bit more about. When you were transitioning then from 3 to 2, when was that from to APU after that that you got the job?
So it was in 2001 I got hired, I think, at Azusa. And then that, that was just a completely different lifestyle change in a lot of ways, working at a Christian university, just doing baseball, having a fall season.
Yeah.
That was great. Being able to practice with your kids and help them develop in the fall. So that transition was really, really neat. Culturally, as a Christian school, that fit my personal value system with my family. Great place to raise your kids. So that transition was great. The tough thing for me, though, is I took over from a great coach, Tony Barbone, who's done really great things in baseball in this area. And so, anytime you take over a program, when I took over Pomona College, historically, baseball-wise, they hadn't done very well. Now, Frank Periclosi's crushing it, doing a great job. He, in fact, was my assistant there for a year or two, I think, before I left to go to APU, and then they hired him to replace me. So we've been side and side. I've been at APU. He's been at Pomona for 18, 19 years and has done such a great job with that program. But prior to that, it was, they had 3 winning seasons, I think, in 47 years. It was still a hard transition because you're a Boston guy and your kids are skateboarding down with their toenails painted into your dugout, and you're like, what is this? Like, coming off the 80s and the 70s, and I got guys skateboarding into the dugout with long hair telling me to hang loose like Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. There was definitely a culture shock for both of us.
And that was the coaches.
Yeah, no, I know. And so we, that took a transition time for me.
Right.
I grew up with a little more intense type of coaching atmosphere, and it needed to be a little less intense. Still accountable, but I had to learn. I had to learn quite a bit by getting kind of knocked down. So that was great for me from that standpoint. And then, taking over at APU that had such a vast history of success, and then at a scholarship school. I never dealt with scholarships.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I said, the first one I offered was to Stephen Vogt, and so I had to learn that landscape, right? And it in both places, it took me 2 to 3 years to get my feet grounded in, okay, this is what my scholarshiping plan is going to look like. This is what my recruiting plan is going to look like at Pomona. Like you said, average SAT is 1470.
Yeah.
That was before it was recalculated.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They moved it again, right?
Yeah. So like you had to put strategies together that you probably learned through failure. Oh, that didn't work. But I want to be successful. So what are the things I'm going to put in place to do that?
That's where that banking comes in.
Yeah, that's probably, so
much.
Yeah, that's true. The same thing at APU and then trying to figure that landscape out. And there were a lot of programs that I looked to as role model programs at the time.
Yeah.
I think when I first got to Pomona, Chapman baseball, Division III school, was a school that I watched the talent level that they played at. I watched how they were coached as they were kicking my tail as a 25-year-old coach. And I said, okay, I think I would like, and I can't remember the coach's name. He ended up going to UC Davis, really good guy. I remember just admiring it and saying, okay, I want even though our schools might be a little different academically, I want my kids to look like that, right? So then that gave me a picture to go out when I was recruiting to find kids that look like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Same thing at APU. At the time, it was actually Biola's our rival. I certainly don't want to say this, but John Verhoeven, I don't know, you probably know who, great guy. In fact, became my pitching coach when he retired from Biola. So been very close with him. Great guy. They were, when I came in, one of the teams he was taking his teams to World Series and getting kids drafted and Christian school. So I'd like to think we recruit different kids in Biola to a certain point, right? Because we're similar schools, but we have different cultural ideas probably on the baseball field to a certain point. But I kind of looked to Coach Hoove and I was like, okay, this is what he does. This is how he's successful. How do I build my program to match that? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
And those were the things that I tried to use early on in my career to learn how to compete with the best, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting too, because that's, I'm thinking about like Maddie and Bean and Pudge, and I'm thinking about how you pass that on to them, because when you take over, you're essentially, it's kind of like building a house, like a fixer-upper.
Sure.
It could be great, it could be a successful program, but I want to put my stamp on it, you know.
Right.
And so it's interesting to hear how you were looking at other teams to try to develop that blueprint, you know, on what I wanted to do. And then, of course, along the way, I'm sure there was some tweaking. And, you know, as you were talking about with the scholarships, I'm thinking, well, a lot of times Moneyball's been around for a long time because colleges have had to do it.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
I would love to give this guy everything, but then I got nothing left to, you know, or now those fantasy football things, you know, they give you like $10,000 to put a team on, then put it all on a quarterback, and now I got a bunch of fourth-string guys. So it's kind of interesting how I don't think players essentially think about that. But again, when you're in high school, you're kind of myopic. I'm just thinking about me, and well, why don't I get all that? Well, because I got 17 other guys that I need to try to decide who's going to get it and who's going to stay and who's going to be the most beneficial to the team. And so it's kind of interesting to hear how, from the start, how you weren't too you know, you're too prideful to look at other programs and take in that to account how you wanted to build yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, you have to, you know, this is kind of probably a catchword. You have to be true to yourself. That doesn't sound like me saying that right now, the way I said that, but I'm on a podcast, so I'm wearing a collared shirt. Usually I don't.
I do have 62 listeners now.
I know.
So we'll get to, hopefully 63 when you go home and click it.
I like that. But at the end of the day, I you know, I had to, you have to do it your way.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I do attribute a lot of those coaches that I mentioned to, and my college coach, Coach Casey, who's just run an amazing program back at Tufts. Those were years of, you know, learning different ways to be successful, and then keeping it within your own personality.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's been, that's been a big learning curve, but something I've enjoyed doing.
Mm-hmm. And then the cool thing I think about that is you come full circle, and you were a speaker at the coaches convention not too long ago. So
That's right.
So you go from learning to being a mentor, and like I said, you're kind of crossing that line where guys are looking at you and giving you that Godfather respect.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It's because, you know, you get Stephen Vogt that played for you, so that was that was more of it. But that was an honor just to be there with Voti. You know, we're super close. Our families are close. You know, just like we are with all the alums. So even just a 3-day weekend in Orlando, that was out in Orlando, I think in 2015 or 16 or something like that. And I used to go to that convention when I was 22. You know, my coach used to take me when I first started GAing. Yeah. And to be, you know, one of the fortunate people to be able to present and feel like you can take all the stuff you've learned from the ABC and the convention and then say, this is how I've packaged it up for me at my level, was awesome. Yeah. So, that was cool.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just one of those things like we had talked about where even as coaches now, there's so much access to information to, you know, even if you decided tomorrow you're a high school coach and I want to break into the college level, there's so much information. You know, there's probably so many things that you probably don't even know that you've said that from there that I have to Google it, but that's probably on there somewhere. Your speech from the coaches convention, I'm sure they're all somewhere.
Yeah,
so you can listen to those and see those, and there's so much access to all that information that you don't even have to take the time to read it anymore. You can just listen to it in your car, and you know, you essentially get that coaching degree in 4 or 5 hours. But you know, there's still that part of it where, as you've been there this long and you start to see, you know, the growth in the school. And you start to see the development of your players, and you're probably getting those guys that are coming back now with their own families, and you might even have some 20 years. You might have a couple guys that, you know, maybe they have some kids or some cousins or nephews that are getting up there. So that's got to be kind of rewarding too when you start seeing that second generation come through. Yeah, you might be a little young for that, but I think
we're getting there. Yeah. We're getting there. Although, we, you know, a lot of Cougs are having a lot of babies, so there's a big population of them out there.
I was trying to think of maybe some of your first guys, because like Robbie's kids they're young, right?
They're young, yeah.
But I think you might have a few from your early coaching days. That maybe
you know what's funny?
12, 13?
My Pomona Pitzer guys, so that was 20 plus years ago. Yeah. Those guys got married a little later. They got their careers going, so their kids are still a little young. Mm-hmm. They're not high school kids yet. Right. But what I've noticed is guys, here's where it is. Guys I played college baseball with have kids that I can recruit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I didn't play, we didn't cross over. One of my current players, Shane Cronin, left-handed pitcher from Westwood, Massachusetts. His dad went to my alma mater, Tufts, played football there. So the year he graduated, I had come in. But I had known, John, the dad, a little bit through friends and football guys that I played football with there. So that was kind of my first real surreal thing. I'm like, I kind of went to college with this guy because we all hung around the same circles.
Right.
And now his son's playing for me. That's when you feel old,
Yeah.
So that's been fun though. I've enjoyed that, right? Just because it's cool to feel like you've come almost at full circle, right?
Sure. Yeah. Now at APU, are you the longest tenured coach there yet?
I am now. Yeah, for baseball.
Or no, just in general.
Shoot, curious. I might be. I don't know. I'd have to check. Bill O'Dell was there for a little while. Cliff Hamlow. These are all legends. Jim Milholm was the football coach. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to check on that.
Because you get to 20 and you start to, depending on when everybody came in.
You're right.
It might have to be somebody might go past 20, but it might be another 10 years you'll be there.
It's funny for a long time. Yeah, I'd love to be there forever. As long as my AD will keep me around. I've always viewed myself as the new guy. I was the new guy at Pomona, and then I went to APU, and I was the new guy. And now all of my peer coaches are all having babies for the first time because they're all young guys and gals. Yeah. And I'm like, my wife and I, Kath, talk about it, and I'm like, dang, I'm the old guy now. I have to think about some of the things I say because I'm 20 years of this, and I still consider myself I still think of when I got hired back in 2001. Yeah. I don't kind of view it that differently, if that makes sense. Yeah. But it's you turn around and you blink and you're like, wow, 20 years, one place, man. I've been blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah. Especially in coaching, I've had some different coaches in, and I've always asked them, the nature of that. And that's going back to your story, coming from the East Coast all the way out here. Yeah. And I'm thinking, when you were looking for those job openings, there wasn't one in Indiana, there wasn't one in Texas, there was, somewhere in between where you kind of worked your way over, but you just kind of went fast track over.
Jumped on a plane.
Yeah. And then again, being here in Southern California with so many universities, JCs, things like that, it's amazing that you only made 2 stops. Yeah. You would think that guys would kind of hop and make 2 or 3 stops and then to even stay in California for that long because of the nature of coaching.
Well, one, I have to stay in California because my wife does not like the East Coast. So, but I told her the kids are getting older now, so who knows? I love New England. I almost feel like I've shared this with her. I'm like, I have great friends out here. You and our relationship in baseball, Robbie and Pudgy and all the boys. Yeah. My players become my family. But there's a different culture in California than New England. And when I go back home, it's home. So I still miss it, even though I'm going to turn that corner where I've been in California longer than I was in Boston. So there's sometimes I'll tell Kath, I've been here 26 years coaching California. Yeah. I still feel out of place recruiting and sitting in the stands because even though I was here as a young coach, I still felt like an outsider. Not an outsider like poor me, I'm sucking my thumb in the corner. Just hey, I didn't grow up in this world. I didn't go to Mount Sac and then end up going to Fullerton or Cal Poly Pomona or, you know what I mean? Yeah. Dominguez or something like that. There's such a great baseball culture out here, right? Starting with Cal State Fullerton and Coach Garrido and, Coach Vanderhook now and all these, and USC, right? Yeah. I'm just a Boston kid. We didn't have, that's a big world for that guy. And so when I came out, I felt whoa, every time I go to a recruiting event, until I started to get to know people, I was like, dang, that guy's the UCLA coach and that guy's Cal State Fullerton. You know what I mean? Yeah. And not growing up in the area, it felt not intimidating, but just you fell out of place. Does that make sense? Yeah. So...
Well, it's interesting that you view yourself like that because you're one of the guys now that, you think about UCLA and you think, oh, that's Savage. You think APU, that's Svagdis.
Dang, I got to come on this podcast more often. You're making me feel good already. Holy smokes.
You've been there that long. I mean, and there's only a few coaches that can. 20 years is,
it's a long
to you,
time.
It seems like a snapshot. But, to all the kids that have gone through the program, the success you guys have had, the changes in the landscape of just college baseball. And, like I was saying, the nature of the coaches transitioning all the time. 20 years, you've been there a while. Yeah. And that's kind of what people think of when, your name has a lot of credibility that brings kids to your school. That's one of the things about it. So it's interesting that you kind of still think of yourself as the new guy.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. But I would say this, going back to that, the jumping from school to school. I think I've always mentally, when I got the job at Pomona, I never thought I would leave. I never had a goal to leave. I had a goal to be all there and all in at Pomona for what it had to offer. For all those kids, the football kids and the baseball kids. I still have great relationships with the football guys that I was able to coach during that 6-year period. So like you go all in mentally on the kids and their development. I never thought like, hey, I'm going to go here 5 or 6 years, try to be successful, move and jump.
Yeah.
We shared already how the APU thing worked out. It was more of a family issue than anything else. And then now being at APU, like when I went to APU, I'm like, oh, great. In fact, I remember when Coach Barbone was there and I was at Pomona, because we used to play APU. My wife and I used to say, hey, man, wouldn't that be a great job? I mean, great school. It's close. We wouldn't have to move. And I never really searched it out. I said, I'm never going to get that job. I'll never get that job. You know, I'm like, Coach Barbone's just crushed it. He's an alum. He's doing great. He ain't ever leaving. It's like a great job. And then lo and behold, 20 years later, I'm there, you know? And so I don't think I've ever gone into coaching to move on. I've gone into coaching to be on the field with the kids that I'm on the field with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if, you know, God decides to bring me somewhere else, you know, I'll certainly entertain that. But at the end of the day, like, that wasn't my motivation when I got into coaching.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It goes back to the mentoring piece a little bit.
It does, exactly. But I just think it's so cool because, you know, I talked to Rudy was here from RCC and I'd asked him the same thing, you know, and I don't know if it's good fortune, obviously, because as coaching, you almost anticipate having to relocate to find that right spot.
That's right.
But for guys like you or guys like Rudy or guys that have found that position and been successful enough to stay there, it takes that element of coaching away from your family that you'd have to uproot, you know, my fourth grade, high school, this and that, which is kind of traumatic on kids. But you get to do what you love and you get to do it at a place you enjoy going to. And there's not a lot of people that get that, you know, in their job. So when I look at that part of a coach, I think, man, that's great. And I hope that it stays that way for guys like, you know, like Adcock and all these other guys, that they find a spot that's in a place that they like, it's a town that they love, it's a job that they love, the environment's good, it works for their family, because I think that gives you more energy to put into the program and the kids. And I just think that's part of the cool part of it, because that was one of the things that was always a concern for coaching with me, because if you want to move up, a lot of times it means relocating. And not that I was ever scared of it, but I'm born and raised here, and I don't want to leave. You know, my family's always been here, and good or bad with California, everything that goes on outside, I'm still used to seeing the same mountain all the time. I'm still used to seeing driving the Mission Inn. Now, I've been in Riverside more than I was in San Bernardino County now, but I still enjoy, you know, that drive when we would go to do things at APU, that drive along the 210 along the mountain, or Pasadena, or, you know, those places I don't know that I could ever feel comfortable someplace else not seeing that. You know, but for you to uproot from that side to here is totally different. But I mean, I get it. You know, it's a totally different vibe. And when you were talking about that, I was giggling because I have this story. I don't know if you remember it, and I always tell it to kids when your name comes up. So we were doing a baseball factory event. I think it was you, me, and Maddie. And we were coaching one of the factory teams in Arizona, and it was in July. And it was just
hot out.
Insanely hot. And we were at that Hilton up on top of the hill. It had that really nice gym. And I remember, you know, the three of us would come back for like the 3 or 4 days and go to the gym. And we were a lot younger. I was a lot more energetic. But I remember after one of the games, we had like a double header, and it was already 11 o'clock. It was already like 110 or something. And we're sitting in the dugout, and the game ends, and I can't remember if we won or lost. And you go, Coach, go ahead and talk to him. So I'm standing out in front of the dugout, and I got my back to the dugout, and I'm looking at the kids, talking to them, and I see some of them giggling. I turn around. You're up on at the top of the bench, and you got your feet on the bench, and you got your pants down around your knees, and you got your sliders on. You're sitting there just rubbing your head, and I turn around and go, Coach, you okay? He goes, Coach, it's hot. And I couldn't keep a straight face after that, because you just looked totally wiped out. I mean, it was like 109.
It was at least, I think it was 114. I think it was, and that's funny you mentioned that, because I tell my wife all the time, like, because it's hot out here. And we were out, it was 95, I'm doing workouts, and because we're spreading out the workouts right now, I'm there from 8:30 to 4:30, hour sessions, every hour on the hour, BP for 8 straight hours, one guy, right? and it's hot.
Yeah.
And we have an astroturfed area that we're hitting on that's not covered. And I'll go home and I'm like, I know you love it out here, but I can't do the heat. That's funny you say that. She'll die. They remind me of that. So it's funny that brings up. What's cool about those events? There was a I can't remember his name, but we nicknamed him Old C. He was a big 6'3" kid from Chicago, Maddie and I. And it's funny doing those events, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was.
Like 15, 16 years ago.
I think Maddie had just started with you.
That's right.
Maybe his first or second year.
It really was, yeah. And just being able to do those events, and you put your buy back there. I remember being pants around the ankles. Hopefully it was appropriate.
It was.
But just being able to hang out with you guys and be around great baseball guys, and then even the kids, like the kids were good kids to be around and stuff like that. That's funny. That was a good memory.
Well, what was funny of that was, like I said, I'm trying to find a way to pump these guys up because we got a second game coming. I turn around and I'm like, all right, well, they're looking at you just absolutely beat from that heat. I got nothing for a guy. Get some Gatorade and we'll see what we can do the second game. But it was I can't get that picture out of my head. And every time it's one of those, I still laugh and it like brings tears in my eyes because it was just such a funny. I couldn't figure out what they were giggling. I turned around, you're just sitting there, Coach, just absolutely beat. I'm like, all right, well, I got no pep talk for that one. But, yeah, like I said, Coach, again, I wanted to thank you for coming out. I mean, this has been great. I would honestly, I would love to keep it, but I'm glad that you gave me this time. I know family, and you got actually a day off. Yeah. I'd like to say you get to stay home, but you always stay home now. But, it was great catching up. And, man, I can't wait till things get going again. We can see you guys on the field. And, what I tell everybody now is I want to try to come back after the games start again, and maybe we'll do a dugout or on-field session, just like a quick how's it going. But again, very grateful for this time, and I got to tell you, I was pumped about it.
Yeah, me too.
And I know, when things get busy again, like I said, we'll look back on this and go, man, I'm glad I got to have that, and I'm really big on that now, and I think that's part of the old guy in me. You start to value those little conversations. You think about, hey, man, the last time I got to talk, we sat down for an hour and did this, and who knows with business and games and practice and families and things, how long it'll be before we even get to do this again.
For sure.
And you, as baseball, for a little snapshot when we were there at APU and doing the baseball factory stuff, we were still part of a team, even though it was only for a little time. And so that's a good memory that I have, that story I told you. And I must have told that 100 times over the last 10 years. But it always brings a chuckle to me when I think about that. But thanks for coming. I appreciate you taking the drive out. And,
and like you said, this is what's great about baseball. Our relationship was developed on the baseball field. And life gets busy, and we were younger. It was 15, 16 years ago, and you start to do stuff, but you get back together, and I'm like, I could go another 3 hours with Ernie right now. And when my wife was like, hey, what are you doing? I said, I was sharing, your story a little bit in the podcast. And I was like, Ernie's one of those guys that I've always really enjoyed being around. High energy, positive. And then I said, he works with high school kids, and he's got the right mentality. He wants all those kids to be successful in life off the baseball field. And I think that's why he's successful, because he's got all those priorities right. And then on the backside of that, they all become really, really excellent baseball players and end up where they need to end up because of he's pouring into them. And so I admire that. I mean, that's why I'm in coaching. I know that's why you're in coaching, and I think that's probably why we could sit here for another 5 hours and talk.
I appreciate that. I mean, and I enjoy watching you guys do that. And, there's always that part where I really get a kick out of connecting a player with a good guy, because I feel, like it's a son. I trust passing them on to you, because aside from baseball, they're going to come up with things that I know you're going to be more than happy to help them with, and you're going to take them further than where we left off, and they're going to be good men, good citizens, good people. And ultimately that's our priority, I think, as coaches, as parents, as men to men. We're trying to build a better society through our medium as baseball. If I was a science teacher, math teacher, that's how I would do it. But I enjoy helping you become more successful, because I get a kick out of watching that. And when they go to other schools, the same way. I want all the guys that I enjoy being around to keep doing what they love. because then you're going to be able to pass that on to your guys, and we'll all be part of that baseball chain for 50, 60 years.
That's right.
Even though we can't play it anymore, we can still talk about it.
I like it. Good stuff.
But again, Coach, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate you coming
out. Appreciate it. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
And, we'll definitely do it again, hopefully on the field.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So until then, I want to thank my sponsors here. We've got Chemical Guys for our hand sanitizer that we use. We also have E29 Baseball, the Inland Empire Express, Chihuahua Cerveza, and Boyle fishing gear. I don't have all my props set up, but anyway, also want to thank my guest Paul Svagdis for coming out on Veterans Day. And again, to all those veteran and servicemen out there, thank you for your time, energy, and effort and everything you've done for our country. So until next time, we'll catch Coach hopefully on the field after a big win. But until next time, we'll see you.